Lustboy, the former support of Blaze and TSM, has gone back to Korea following his time as a TSM starter, since he's been released now. And he did a vlog, which is in Korean, but someone posted a translation of it on Reddit. And admittedly, I don't know what the kind of details are behind who translated it and how accurate it is, but it seemed like they did a reasonable job, and there were some interesting things stated within this vlog. And one of the things that I thought was quite interesting was he details essentially his life in America contrasted to what it was like in Korea playing for Korean teams versus what it's like playing for TSM, for example. And obviously TSM's pretty much the pinnacle of the Western teams in terms of infrastructure, amount of money they have to spend, resources, where you live, how you get taken care of, all these sorts of things. What I found interesting was he was just saying all this stuff as, you know, kind of a day-to-day thing of like, here's what life's like, you wake up, you do this, here's what solo queue's like. But personally, when I was listening to it, what I was actually getting from it was how interesting the gaps are within the Western scene that still haven't been filled, that are different from Korean esports and what it's like over there, but don't necessarily have anything to do with a lack of something that we have in the Korean scene. And so it actually, in some ways, he naively, for my money, exposed some of the Western excuses for not being as good as Koreans and Asians as being kind of bullshit, on the grounds that the Westerners still aren't doing everything they need to do and are still slacking in many ways, which aren't necessarily affected by what they don't have in terms of lacking social or infrastructure aspects that they have in the Asian scene. So here's an interesting thing that he said when he's contrasting North American League of Legends here. He said, some differences I noticed are you get more free time, you can't really take solo queue seriously, there are faster GGs and scrims, free time includes just playing other games like Hearthstone or streaming or just resting. I don't know about now, but they didn't have this while I was on CJ, so I think playing in America is just more laxed. And when obviously he hasn't played in a Korean team since 2014, so he's just saying he doesn't know how things have changed. Like maybe things are more lax in Korea now. It doesn't seem so likely, but okay, he's opening the possibility there, which is being reasonable. Obviously he doesn't know what it's like there. So let's go through these point by point. The first one, which I found not really shocking, but the way he states it is kind of exposes one of the excuses of the West, is the idea that you can't take solo queue seriously there. Now, he says one of the reasons you can't take solo queue seriously, he actually says this part here. The solo queue problem is that there are not many, or if at all, amateur players that would die to reach the most amount of points in Challenger. Pro players don't really rate solo queue points. In Korea, solo queue points, LP and Challenger, represents a player's skill or ability, but there are some few exceptions for players who are good with a low solo queue rating. As far as I know, I think the people said Wolf from SK Telecom was one. Just a tangent from me there. In America, I don't think it matters that much. Obviously, the higher ranked Challenger are better than the lower ones, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think there's a big difference. Now, here's the interesting thing about what he's saying about solo queue there, is that, yes, he approaches it initially from the amateur point of view. In Korea, amateurs are going so hard at the game. I mean, I've played some Korean solo queue, obviously not at a super high level, where even at like lower levels, people are flaming you super hard for what, not even mistakes, just simply not making amazing plays sometimes, or not doing the perfect play. And I know now, unfortunately, Westerners who've played solo queue themselves are going to be like, well, that happens to me all the time. People are flaming me all the time. No, the difference is, for the difference of my experiences, people would flame you for, sure, even minor mistakes in the West, but people sometimes flame you in Korea for what actually is fairly ridiculous stuff, like not reading some play way ahead or knowing an extra detail about how to do something that's actually above and beyond what people would even notice in the West. They'd kind of think, oh, whatever, we're still winning, it's still fine. So it's true, the amateur scene over there is incredibly vibrant, is incredibly healthy. Now, obviously, we don't have that in the West, but here's the interesting thing. I think part of what would spur that is what he says next. And here's the part where I notice there's like a disconnect between Westerners, and the excuse they make is the fact that they don't have the amateurs, and that's why Korea's ahead. So he then says, it's not just amateurs, he then says that the pros don't really care about solo queue points. As in, it's not they don't play solo queue, they do, but first of all, they're not playing it dying, living like life and death over the points themselves. They're not trying to be the number one on solo queue just to show all the other Westerners, like, you know, I'm the best in solo queue or whatever. They're just playing it more for fun or in their free time, or just to like keep warmed up in the game, in a sense, maintain their skills, not necessarily go ham trying to get super good. Now, this in itself is a key point to make, because the same thing happens in Europe. It's something that Forgiven's said, where there's been certain really good pros, really good LCS players who've dropped out of challenge and have been down at like as low as master, and some even lower than that. Some actual LCS pros, admittedly not the really good ones in this sense, that have been down in diamond while they're in LCS. And then, so it's the same in the EU as it is in NA. But here's the point. So in NA alone, on the NA server, there are 10 teams with at least 5 players, the starters, and obviously some have subs. So that's 50 pros right there. Forget the amateurs. If those 50 pros were just playing solo queue all the time and they were trying really hard in solo queue and taking solo queue seriously and trying to get as many points as they could and show how good they are in that sense, first of all, just them alone would make solo queue way better on the pro level, at the top level, in terms of the quality of the games they'd have. They wouldn't be fucking around. They wouldn't be messing around and think, who cares about that? And rank doesn't matter to me in any sense. Obviously, it doesn't mean you're the best, but it is a way of showing like how good you are compared to people. Admittedly, it's a flawed system, but within that limited metric, as they're trying to do in Korea, where it's their life and death to try and get the top spot on solo queue for most players. So even the pros themselves could take away part of that excuse by themselves trying, but they don't themselves, and then they'll even use the same excuse, but other people slack off and other pros slack off, and because other pros slack off, they use that as an excuse as to why they, as a pro, don't practice hard, and therefore it creates a self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling prophecy where then even they aren't doing it, even though they internally must know they probably should, and so no one is doing it. Pros aren't doing it, semi-pros aren't doing it, amateurs aren't doing it. Here's the thing. If the pros were going super hard, first of all, it'd create a better environment for them. And secondly, it would then make people who are like semi-pros and want to break into LCS have to go even harder to show themselves in solo queue, to show they've got some skills. And it would then provide a grounds where if they did some crazy shit on challenge and had some great streak and were showing great proficiency with the new champions, it would also be like a good ground to show, you actually have some talent. Whereas at the moment, if you do that now and you get super high on challenger, what will all the other pros say? Who gives a shit? We don't really try. We're in solo queue anyway. Who cares about some solo queue star? Difference is, much like in Korea, where if you're a solo queue sensation, you really do get attention. People, wow, he's doing that well against pros who are trying hard. We should take a look at this guy and maybe check if he's got some talent, or if we can develop it. That would also set the foundation for some of the semi-pros to show where they are. It would set a platform for them, a stage where they could show off their skills. Secondly, once you've got the pros doing it and some semi-pros doing it, now some of the amateurs are going to start practicing more and going harder because it's going to become a status thing. And if they don't, they're going to get knocked aside and they're not going to be able to compete with the other guys. They're not going to be hovering around there while fucking around themselves, just one trick pony and one champ just to be a dick. It's one thing if you're just only good on that one champion, you're some Bishu guy trying to make it super high, but that's your main champion. No, we're talking about people who are just messing around. It would create a more serious environment, and that's something that, because people aren't doing it in the West, I don't care that it's true that there's not as good a field of amateurs. You're not even doing the best that you can do right now. I mean, I remember, I think it was an episode of Summoning Insight where I asked Monty about this when he was in CLG, and he said he summed it up like this. He said, Doublelift never gave a shit about solo queue. And Doublelift said this in interviews with me. Back in 2012, he used to say he didn't even think playing solo queue was good. In fact, he thought it made you worse. Obviously, that's a very naive idea that he's had to overcome himself. But I asked him along the lines of, like, why don't the best players in NA try to get to the top of the Challenge League? And he said something along the lines of, I'll have to, obviously, I don't know it verbatim, and I can't look up the episode. There's no way to search that shit online. So the story went along the lines of, like, he remembers Doublelift trying for a few weeks to play a whole gang of games, and he got something insane, like a 75% win rate over these games. He climbed super high up the challenger thing, and then he just got bored and whatever, and just quit doing it, and then just started playing for fun again. So the point is, these people could create that environment. They choose not to. We're talking about the top level pros, and then the lower level pros, then the semi-pros. Fuck the amateurs, that's the bottom level. It will be a trickle down in terms of creating this more serious environment, and we're not doing the parts at the top. So if you're some top level guy, you can't be complaining now when you're not doing your part to put in place this structure. Then there's the issue where he said the part about how there's faster GGs in scrims. There's another one. So teams aren't even trying their hardest in scrims. I mean, when I say trying my hardest, by the way, I don't mean trying to win the scrim, because what's funny is that's a mistake that Westerners have often made, and in CS, especially CSGO, that's a key mistake where people try to win the scrim rather than practice. No, the point is you have to also practice more in scenarios which are quite unfavourable. It's in this sort of a scenario, the Westerners are giving up, and we've heard tons of stories of this, where people just lose the lane too hard within 8 minutes and like, GG, restart the scrim. What's going to happen when you're in a game? And yes, it's not going to happen often, but when that actually happens. I mean, the great example was the example where Moscow 5 versus Dignitas in the IEM final in March of 2012 really did have a scenario like this, where everything went completely to shit at level 1, 2, and 3. So they were so far behind, but it was a real game, and they'd almost never practiced for that sort of scenario, so they had no possible options. Now, you couldn't practice for for that exact situation because it wouldn't play out exactly the same, would it? But you could practice for similar scenarios. You could practice having a mentality of playing from behind and accepting we're going to have a bad early start and seeing what we can do from there on. This is the sort of thing that they're not doing again in the West that actually has nothing to do with Korea. They're not even doing what the Koreans are doing in this sense. Yet this has nothing to do with infrastructure playing these scrims out in that sense. Then there's the whole issue, he says, where in their free time, because they're GGing out, they're not taking solo queues seriously, so the stuff outside of the scrims, they're not even taking it seriously. In this free time they have, they're doing stuff like playing Hearthstone or streaming or resting. Now, again, you can't use it as an excuse when you're the one not doing the thing. So if you're resting, okay, great, you get the enjoyment of resting. You've chosen to rest rather than practice more to hone your craft, which is what the Korean guy's doing in the time when you're resting. Or you've chosen to play Hearthstone, to have fun, to play a game like Hearthstone, great. You've got a positive thing in your life. Don't then complain, oh, but I got something nice in my life and I didn't apply myself to work as hard as the other guy did. Some of those guys aren't playing those games or even vaguely to that level of degree, yet you're doing it over here. And then in terms of the streaming one, think about this one. These Western players who are complaining that way and blaming it on infrastructure, blaming it on something else that is real, while they're not doing even what they could do within their own domain, within the power of their will and their circumstances, they're also using some of the time they have off that they're not applying themselves more to stream. And what do they do when they stream? Sure, they're playing solo queue, but they're not trying so hard in solo queue in the same way that you would as a Korean. They're not trying hard even and just streaming it. They're being streaming personalities. They're having fun. They're playing games with subs. They're doing all these things that we love from streamers. But in doing so, they're making money. They're building their brands. These are things that the same Korean who's just practicing that solo queue can't do with his time. So it seems a bit fucked that he's trying his hardest. He's using the same amount of time on solo queue that you are in theory, and yet you're making money off, you're making a brand off it. You're purposely flaunting the fact that you're not being super serious, and yet you then complain, he has all these advantages, that's why he's better than me. Yeah, he has some advantages. You're not taking advantage of what you have in your particular, going for you in this scenario. You're making the most of your resources. That's one of the biggest problems. When it comes to these Western excuses, it's not that Korea lacks advantages. They clearly have certain advantages. Everyone living in Seoul, super fast internet, this culture that everyone's trying to go really hard at the game, which actually comes from the Korean culture itself. So there's some interesting things to be said there sociologically. But it's that Westerners aren't even taking advantage of what they themselves have going for themselves. What is it within their domain? What are their circumstances that they find themselves in? Once you've made the most of those and you're going hard, then you can complain about what you're lacking. You're not even making use of what you have right now. There's also the factor that there are so many things that we could implement today that we've already had the resources for that we never have, that Koreans are years ahead of because they're not still arguing over this shit, partly again because of how their culture is. So for example, the level of resistance to coaching is unreal. I know pro players. I talk to LCS players, and the number of them who were telling me, like 3 weeks into a split, I don't think this coach is very good. Doesn't seem to know anything. Like, it's so annoying. Like, we talk to each other about after he goes, and we're like, this guy, he doesn't seem to have the right attitude, or, does he really think that pick's good or whatever? The way they interact with the coach is so different from the way they do it in Korea, from my experience and from talking to players that I know who are Koreans and are people who've been around that scene. I mean, there's a degree to which there are teams who've made it deep in Worlds this year. I mean, I guess I'm already giving it away by saying that. Who are like skeptical over how much of a role a coach should actually have, and even what role the analyst has. Like, even if they give them good information, but could anyone have found that out? Do I really need him to do that? I mean, I know the champion's better than him. There's people who are really still thinking that way in the end of 2015. This isn't like 2012 when you didn't have the infrastructure. We've had this infrastructure for 1 or 2 years, 2 or 3 in the cases of certain teams, and people still haven't even got to the point where they've accepted the premise that coaching can exist and be a real thing. And until you accept the premise, you can't then build on it, have coaches, accept what they say, take it on board, try and work on it. Then if it doesn't work, they can be removed later or replaced and better coaches come in. But until that initial process is accepted, the premise, and we start the process of coaching, we can't get better coaches and get them at a high level. Over in Korea, if you get lumped with a shit coach who doesn't do a very good job, who's kind of like only doing an okay job here and there, he's not the best coach even in the industry, a lot of them won't even complain about it. Because again, that's an elder to them, that's an authority figure, that's their boss essentially, or a representative of their boss. They'll just have to put up with it. And if he's just an average coach, they might not even in their minds, some of them, sadly, I know from talking to them, even really realise that their coach isn't that good. They just think like, right, well, I'm doing what he says and we're just not winning. They blame themselves. They're looking at their own, like, what can I work on? Well, my own shit. Obviously, I have to have a coach. I have to listen to that. Remember, it's up to the org to replace coaches and to get better coaching stuff. That's their failure if they can't do it. As a player, unfortunately, you're supposed to be listening to them, following the group philosophy and strategy. And if it's wrong, okay, you do your best within it. I realize this is different to a Western mentality, but again, it's an area where we're so far behind because people's mentality isn't even correct. Forget the resources. Then there's the fact that this is going to be a side tangent, but I always want to make this point. I think it's great that people can do streaming on the side. I think it's great that they can have time off and they're not forced to play all the day and play all the scrims super hard practicing and then play a million hours solo queue just to show you're dedicated and then have no time off and then be going super hard. I don't think that's great. I wish there was a world in which we could have it like this right now, where we have a good scene and people are trying pretty hard and they're not as good as the Koreans, but they have some of them have their own special flair, and as long as they play their style and they play well, they have a chance at least to upset and get some good, but they have a life as well as it. They get the rewards of being a pro gamer, not this slave lifestyle. I'll give you an analogy, okay? So there's a female MMA fighter called Ronda Rousey who just lost the UFC, I think it's bantamweight, is it? Is that the weight she's in? Title to a girl called Holly Holm, who's a kickboxer, a former boxer. And what's interesting is, if you've ever looked into the story of Ronda Rousey, you can see actually the seeds that are planted as to why she was such a dominant champion and to why she was such an incredible fighter, actually. Which is, and by the way, her career is clearly not over, but up until that point, she just seemed unbeatable. Because her mother, who was some sort of like Olympic judo medalist or something, which she later became herself, is someone who apparently has like a degree in like developmental psychology. So she's learned about like how children think and how they learn and stuff. But because her mother is one of these people who's like a ridiculous borderline sociopath, where they're just so focused on winning that like only the absolute best, it's not even about you just being your best, it's about you must succeed and hit this certain marker, and if you fail, that person succeeded, you failed, you should feel ashamed, you should work harder. All that matters in your life is to reach that goal. Unfortunately, in a weird sort of way, it's almost like her mother fucked this kid up completely and used the tools of how to think about how children learn to, in a really, I think it's actually kind of fucked up way, teach her daughter that was like all that mattered in life. Like, fuck everything else in life, fuck friends, fuck all this stuff. The most important thing is always like the training, is the getting better, is to be the best. And when you're on top, to find ways to motivate yourself to be the best. And as a result, Ronda Rousey is a fantastic athlete and was a very good fighter and probably will be for many years to come. But part of what's made her the best and made her stay on top for so long and keep evolving her game and keep finding weird, here's what's funny, people who are just casual MMA fans think she's an asshole, right? Because they see the way she behaves in interviews and stuff and they think, oh, why does she like lie sometimes about her opponent being disrespectful or find ways to pick little holes in it? You have to understand, that's a technique that she's learned. Her whole thing's like me against the world, and whoever I'm fighting, I have to hate them and I have to believe that they've disrespected me. I have to use every tool I can to motivate myself, to get myself psyched up, to get myself in a position where this isn't just another battle I'm taking that's like a normal one, an everyday thing. Every battle's like life or death, and I'm going for gold and I'm going to try and win every time. And every day, even if I'm already the champion, even if I'm already the best, which she was previously, I've got to keep working to try and keep better, and people are always coming after me, and there's almost like this paranoia, this scarcity, this hunger, this sociopathic drive to be the best. That's part of what's made her great, and it's made most of the great MMA fighters and most of the great sportsmen great, by the way. It's very rare that you get kind of like a Roger Federer, George St. Pierre guy who seems to have that same quality towards practice, but whereas like the others, let's use the analogy of Star Wars, are like Sith, who they they lust after power, and power's all that matters. And if you have power, it's to beat people down and to constantly be fighting, and nothing's good enough in that sense. You're always trying to gain more and be more and battle more. In that sense, they're more like the Jedis, where it's like they've honed their skills to a high level, but they're at peace with things, and they know that it's important to stay on top. It's like it's very rare that you get that sort of an individual. So the point I'm making here is to get to the level that the Ronda Rousey had to get to in her career, you probably couldn't be a normal person and do that. You'd have to be a pretty fucked up person to get there and accomplish what she's accomplished. And anyone who'll look at the Holly Holm girl and go, she seems a nice person, she's yet to accomplish what Ronda Rousey has. Let's see how many title defenses she has. There's a great quote, I forget who said it, which says something along the lines of like, envy the spoils I have, or something like that, but also envy the toil which it cost to acquire them, like the work I had to put on, the things I had to do, the sacrifice I had to make. That's not an exact quote, by the way, but that's the gist of it. And it's a great point to make, the layers you have to go to. So the point is, to apply this to Koreans now, you wouldn't want to be a fucking top level Korean pro. It means to give up everything in your life, almost. All the things that we find meaningful, all the rewards, to have time off, to be able to do other things, to play another game, to take a breather, to not have the stress of the coach always in your face, to not have people telling you a failure when you make it to a semi or a final but you don't win. These are all the things that in the West we want. This is the world of the Koreans. It's fucked up. And I don't think it's that Koreans are some special creatures that magically don't crumble under pressure. What's fucked up about their scene is like the Ronda Rousey scenario. You don't have a choice. they're going to weed you out. And if early on you fail and you don't do well in games, they'll just chuck you the fuck out. And you'll be some smeb type guy where, unless you get a second chance through some miracle scenario like he did with GE Tigers because of the way the league was changed, you'll never get a chance to show that you actually might later on be a fantastic player. They're looking for fantastic players who don't break immediately, like some Spartan shit, where if you're the kid who can't survive the early training, they do just put you out on the mountain to die. They're just looking for someone who's really good and doesn't crumble under pressure and can do what they ask right now and can fit in a unit and can perform right today, right this second. And if you can't get the fuck out the room, we've got 50 other guys who are waiting to come in and take your spot. That's a horrible world to live in. Now, maybe they can handle it. Maybe their culture's different. Maybe some of these guys really are that rare individual that you've nailed down in that sense because they've got so many players that they've found the ones who just don't break under this system. Great. There is a beauty to that. There is an impressive quality to the human achievement of being able to do that. But who the fuck as a Westerner would want to live that life? You wouldn't want to. I've seen scenarios. Okay, so in the West, when players lose in the playoffs in the LCS, sometimes they'll make a tweet like, sorry to all my fans, I let you guys down. I'll tell you something. I know some of these players personally. Some of them don't really mean it, or they mean it on a minor level. Like they're actually saying sorry to the fans, as in, I'm sorry to the fans that you feel sorry that we didn't make it and you put your hopes in me. They themselves don't feel like a massive amount of regret and remorse. Some of them don't. Some of them are like, oh, it sucks and I wish it had gone differently. Oh, if I'd have done this now, I'd have won the match differently. I've really seen scenarios where great Korean players lost a final, like they made it all the way to the final, and they were just crushed. And I've even heard some of them say things like, I'd rather not even have got to a final if I was going to lose. I'd rather have just lost in the round of 8 and been nobody and been shit. To make it to the final and know I had a chance to win, and then I let myself down and I failed after all that I trained for, it actually crushed them on a personal level. This wasn't some like grandstanding they were doing publicly. This is private conversations. These people really, it was do or die, because the whole point is they've given up so much in their life to get to that point and to have the team around them and have the coaching staff and have everything pushing them, give them the push to finally be the champion, and they haven't succeeded. They feel as fucked up as it is, like their whole life was a failure. Because you have to realize they really have just given it all up. They've sacrificed sometimes friends and family. They've had to move away from where they live. Parents have disowned them at times before they become successful. They've sacrificed free time. They've sacrificed hobbies, sacrificed building their personality up. Sometimes they've sacrificed personal relationships. Some of them are allowed girlfriends, but even then with like a curfew of 1 or 2 hours a night, they could maybe see them a little bit. They've sacrificed so much that the game is everything. And essentially, not only is the game everything, but as a result, the rest of life is nothing. Now, no one's going to be like that in the West. So you can see, I'm not saying people should be like Koreans. I'm saying you probably never will be able to get all the same advantages. You wouldn't want them, but make the fucking most of what you do have before complaining, because those excuses are bullshit that Westerners give. Europeans, North Americans, and what's funny is Europeans don't even give as many excuses, yet by the logic of North Americans, Europeans should make even more excuses. Oh, we have less money in our scene, we have less X, Y, and Z. Yet you look at Worlds, oh look, 2 European teams into the semi-finals. Where the fuck were North Americans? They have more money, they have better houses, they have better coaching staff, they have more fame and brand exposure, yet the Europeans made it further. So before you start complaining about things you don't have, take a look at what you fucking do have and make the most of it. Now, I'll tell you what, if that sounded horrible, if that sounded like a world you wouldn't want to live in, well, you know what? I bet you would like I would, to live in an esports world where when you play, you can play for fun, you can win money, there's not the stress of the coach breathing down your neck, there's not the pressure of all the fans looking. Why not play at Alpha Draft? You can play fantasy esports there, and alphadraft.com, they have League of Legends, CSGO, Dota 2, Smite, all different competitions. They have fun ones that are for free, they have ones that are for very little money, they have ones that have decent amounts of money, they have ones that are for $1,000 if you want to go crazy and play head-to-head with some baller-esque fuck like me for $1,000. And not actually me, I would never play for $1,000. I'd just get the $1,000, spend that Skrilla, but I would never blow it, because I need that Skrilla, you see. I play like the $5 ones, the $1 ones, and it's fun, it's fast, it's fun, it's got dominion over the entire fantasy esports domain, it's Alpha Draft. That's the end. Press the stop button.